Ladies and gents, PepperBelly here, and I got some good news in the Interstellar Marines realm. Not only did the game receive a new update that completely changes and revitalizes the way the game plays and feels, but it's also going to be free for the entire week to download and play. In addition to that, it's actually going to be listed at 66% off, so if you end up enjoying playing the game when you try it out for free, you can get it for a significant discount, which is, to say the least, quite awesome. So let's actually discuss the update now, which is Update 17. It was released on February 6th, which was Friday of last week. And there's been some numerous changes, one of which is what you're seeing right now, which is the stamina system, which includes the ability to actually sprint. And it's a nice additional feature. It actually really changed the tone of the game, and I'll explain that in a bit. And I'll also go through some of the other changes as well. The changelog is actually kind of extensive on this one, a little bit bigger than it has been in the past, and there's a lot of new changes and fixes, which is nice to see. And I'm not going to go through every single one. I'll mainly just cover the most notable right off the bat when you start up Interstellar Marines, when you start playing it. The things you will immediately recognize has been changed. One of which you can see right now is the actual assault rifle reticle. They added new vertical and horizontal hair markers, which don't really serve a purpose other than just making target acquisition slightly better, in my opinion. It just makes things a little bit easier to identify targets and line up those shots, or follow moving targets or whatever. It kind of helps with that, but it's purely mostly just an aesthetic change. It doesn't really offer, like, there's no range markers on it that you're going to be using, especially how there's no real ballistic bullet drop or ballistic physics yet. I don't know if they're planning on implementing that at some point. That would be pretty sweet, but at the moment, it's purely aesthetic. They also added a brand new introduction mission, which kind of gets you familiar with Interstellar Marines by putting you through a training environment reminiscent of Running Man that they had in their browser Unity plugin that you were able to experience on their website. It feels a lot similar to that. It's very immersive. It's actually very well put together, and it really does illustrate the new changes that have occurred in this latest update that you can actually experience and get familiar with the game now, especially how actually sprinting and running, the way shift is binded to both, and how they function in a new kind of intuitive, dynamic way that takes a little while to get used to at first, but once you kind of get it down pat, which is kind of what the whole actual introduction mission helps you get familiar with, it's actually a very effective way of minimizing the required amount of keys to perform the same simple tasks. Like the fact that shift is binded to both changing from walking and running to sprinting all in one key. It's kind of cool how Interstellar Marines actually does their controls, and it reminds me a lot of what GRAW on PC did, so Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter, the series on there, where basically it's like you can either click to toggle your aims, your aim down sights, or you can hold it down and you hold an aim. And if you let go of it, then it'll go away. The Interstellar Marines does the same thing. It even does it for crouching. So if I want to crouch, I can hold down the crouch button and release it, and it'll be like a hold crouch, or I can tap it and it'll toggle my crouch. And now they pretty much did the same thing for sprinting with the stamina system. So basically now it's like you tap shift and you'll start running at the tactical pace. If you hold shift down, then it initiates the sprint. If you let go of shift, you'll be moving at the fastest pace. You tap shift again and you'll start walking. So you basically toggle by tapping shift between the running pace and the walking pace, and you hold shift to sprint. Now, some people may not like this. I personally don't. I mean, it's a good idea and it works very well, but I like a little bit more control and more ease in how I actually manipulate my character in the game. So for me, I would actually bind it something a little bit different than that. Maybe for me, it'd kind of be like the reverse. I'd rather it be tapping to shift because I'm not going to be using it nearly as much, and then hold to run and release to walk. That's kind of how it would be for me. I just do it in reverse. But obviously, those changes would probably come at a later date, giving you a little bit more control over your actual key bindings, which would be excellent. And I think if they can manage to get that down pat perfectly, like, this game will excel in the ability to actually customize your controls and keybinds to the way you want, so that you can be as effective as you want when you're playing the game, which is kind of essential for the games like this. You don't want to have anything like kind of bogging down your fluidity when you're actually playing the game, making it more of an annoyance, like you have no control over your character. So other than the fact that you actually can sprint, the stamina system actually introduces some new attributes to the way your character moves around that is just significantly more realistic. Not quite 100% pinpoint excellent, but it's getting there. And of course, this is the first iteration of the stamina system, so keep in mind that things are supposed to change. They're subject to change. They're going to change. They're going to refine it so that when Update 18 comes out, it'll probably be the last iteration before any more significant changes. So it's more or less they're going to make it kind of the final stamina system in Update 18, so they don't really have to worry about it throughout development. So it's kind of just like, there you go, it's set in stone to a degree. It can change potentially down the line, but for now, it's sufficient enough to give you a good experience while we keep working on the game in other areas. So to me, that's perfectly fine. But I'm going to voice my opinions on some of the gripes I have, and some of the things that are actually really, really good about the stamina system. So initially, I had no clue that the stamina system actually had fatiguing and endurance exertion at first. It took me a little while to figure it out. That's mainly because it takes a long time to suddenly just become exerted, and it's literally spontaneous. So you'll be like sprinting, and apparently somebody calculated it. It's roughly around 23 seconds of consistent sprinting, or if you just sprint and jump a lot, or jumping over railings and whatever, you'll exert yourself faster. And it's literally just all of a sudden a spontaneous you're breathing really, really heavily, and it takes ages to recover. There's no build-up whatsoever to the fact that you're actually becoming exerted over time. Now, that's a problem, in my mind. But again, this is the first iteration, so keep that in mind. It's a problem because, in reality, when you're running around, you know that you're getting tired. You can tell, especially when you're playing a game, through audible sounds. Your character's gradually starting to breathe heavier and heavier. His movement isn't quite as rapid. He starts slowing down. He's getting tired over time. And you can learn how to control your character's stamina and endurance by watching and knowing your character's performance level. And it made it kind of difficult to do that because you're sprinting and it seems like you can go forever, and then all of a sudden, oh, you're fatigued. Like, the breathing just starts and you're like having an asthma attack, and that's pretty much that. And you're sitting there, and even if you're standing completely still, it takes a very, very long time to recover. Longer than it should, in my opinion. Because you gotta remember, you're a Special Forces operator. You're literally the best of the best. You're the most physically athletic type of human being on the planet. You should not be exerted that quickly. I mean, well, that quickly I can understand, but when it comes to recovery time, it should not take that long. And other than that, it's pretty solid. But the breathing, it'd be nicer to have an actual gradual increase in, like, you can tell that your character is starting to become fatigued through continuous exertion. You can actually hear your character getting tired more and more, so you can actually know when to stop, how to properly control your character to manage and control your stamina to be more effective on the battlefield. That's what you want. And in tactical shooters like this, it's crucial. You need to know your character's current stamina level so that you can maintain it properly so you're always effective. But other than that, what I initially thought, because at first I didn't even know there was a stamina system, like I was saying, until I discovered that suddenly you start running out of breath. But they actually changed the way the weapon actually moves. So now it actually moves independent of your screen or your field of view. More like what Arma 3 has going on right now, or other tactical shooters like, you can think of even Red Orchestra, where basically if you're walking around, the weapon will move on your screen, it'll move around, the iron sight will move independent of the center of your screen. Before this update, the actual center crosshair of your weapon's sight would stay fixed to the center of your screen, and when you would move around, your whole screen would kind of bounce. And the weapon would move around, but the crosshair would always stay in the center. Now, it doesn't. The actual crosshair will bounce up and down, bob around, and sway as you're moving like it would in the real world. This is a great step in the right direction, because ultimately, it was just too overpowered before. It was too unrealistic where your weapon sight would stay completely straight while moving. And think of it like kind of what Insurgency has going on right now, where if you're walking around, the weapon sight is perfectly straight. That wouldn't happen. As you're walking, that sight would kind of shake a little bit and move depending on the speed that you're moving at and the type of terrain you're walking over. Well, unfortunately, games aren't quite to the point now where we can, simulate walking over rougher terrain to really make the sight move more independently or more chaotically. We're not at that point yet, so we could still improve realism by making the weapon simply just move as if you're walking on a flat surface, and how the weapon would actually behave in doing so. So naturally in this game, the faster you move, the more weapon movement there is. Your sight will bounce up and down more significantly than if you're moving slower or staying completely still. Now my gripe here is the fact that the submachine gun's weapon sight bounces and moves significantly more than that of the assault rifle. That makes like no sense at all. And the reason why is because usually when you're using a higher magnification sight, the perceived movement is significantly higher when you're looking through it than something with less magnification. That's just how it is. You can pretty much illustrate this and practice it at home using binoculars. If you stare at something directly in front of you and you're holding up a phone or hold up your finger like it's an iron sight and you're looking at something and you're walking around, it's not going to be moving very much. Pick up binoculars, look through them, and start walking around, and you're going to see it like shaking and vibrating like there's an earthquake going on because of how much more the movement seems because it's magnified. That's just the way things are. The more magnified they are, the more motion you perceive based on it. That makes any sense to you guys? It should. I kind of simplified that as best I could. Basically, the higher the magnification, the more perceived motion there is whenever it moves around. So, using the assault rifle in this game, it just seems like it's strange how the submachine gun's holographic, which has no zoom whatsoever, it has no magnification, it should just be like a 1x type thing, for some reason bounces significantly more. And you can even see it here right now, how it's moving violently, even while walking very slowly. And if I use the assault rifle, it barely bobs up and down. And if you're aiming at a target at range, you can definitely see it, where the assault rifle stays on target very, very well, and the submachine gun not so much. So that's something I think that needs to be addressed at some point in the future. Basically just make the assault rifle have a more significant bob whenever you're moving. I think the best way you can actually literally practice this at home is to like hold a stick in your hand with a laser pointer taped to the end of it, and hold it like you're holding a rifle and just walk and watch how much the laser actually moves against the wall the further away it is. That's probably the best example I can give, and it'll give you a very good picture of what it's actually like to walk around with a weapon and where the actual muzzle will be pointing as you're doing that, because the laser basically represents where the actual muzzle is pointing as you're doing that. Or if you actually have an airsoft gun or a water gun or something or whatever, just put a laser on it and do that and you'll see what I'm talking about. So ultimately, I think that needs to be addressed, but it's not a complete game killer right now. Again, this is the first iteration, things are subject to change. Now, the one other thing that kind of irked me a little bit was the fact that they seem to have increased the recoil and the random, chaotic nature of the way the weapon handles when you're firing the weapon from the shoulder. Now, beforehand, it kind of behaved in a way where it was controllable, and now it seems to be more spontaneously just nuts at times. So they increased the recoil, and I'm pretty sure they did because I'm no longer able to, like, hip fire, and I say that with like quotation marks because of course it's shooting from the shoulder or point shooting, which I'll explain in a second for the 80th millionth time. I've explained it all the time when I talk about this. Basically, it seems a little bit more unpredictable now. So if I'm firing the weapon, sometimes the recoil will be like not so significant, and I'll fire it again, and suddenly it'll be like it'll kick like 3 feet to the left at range. I'm talking about I don't mean 3 feet like literally the muzzle moves 3 feet. I mean like if you're aiming at something, you'll aim 3 feet off the target to the left. Or it's crazy, just kind of how chaotic it is and spontaneous it is, which doesn't make too much sense because before I wouldn't say it was perfect, but it was pretty damn close to being perfect in the way that it actually feels to point shoot. Because point shooting is a very effective and useful tool in a soldier's arsenal for close quarter combat, and it's used all the time. You don't typically use your weapon sights whenever you're operating indoors or in close quarters. You point shoot. It's an instinctive thing. And this game had probably some of the best instinctive shooting I've experienced in any game. Because I was able to, even without crosshairs or the laser turned on, instinctively turn on a target and shoot him with ridiculous precision at close ranges. And even sometimes at medium to long ranges, and that's pretty much how it feels in real life. You are instinctively able to just point your weapon and shoot the target. You don't use your sights. You just point and shoot, hence why it's called point shooting. It's instinctive. You don't think about it, you just do it. And it's supposed to feel completely natural when you're doing so, and this game had it right the first time, and now it seems like they kind of went in the opposite direction, making the recoil harder to manage and harder to predict, making it so that you can't really point shoot effectively. Even when you're tapping the weapon off in semi-automatic as best you can, sometimes you'll kind of notice that some of the rounds you fire the weapon will barely kind of have a recoil to it, and other times it'll be so significant it'll throw your whole screen off target. And it's unpredictable in that nature, which to me, I'm not particularly fond of. I can see what they're trying to do with it. They're trying to encourage you to use your sights more often, but the reality is when you're firing from the shoulder, it's incredibly accurate. It's simple as that, and a lot of people seem to forget that. And right now, the way I can describe it, the best way I can describe it is the way it feels when you're firing this weapon without using your actual weapon sights. it feels like the only contact points the weapon has for stability with my body is literally the stock to my shoulder and the pistol grip to my right hand, and then my left hand is literally just tucked in my pocket while I'm just walking around trying to shoot people, because it feels like I have zero muzzle control whatsoever when I'm firing the weapon from the shoulder or point shooting. And that's kind of a problem. Before it wasn't so exaggerated, now it kind of feels more like there is no muzzle control, there is no proper left hand support maintaining that muzzle while I'm firing rounds off. It feels more or less like there's too much movement at the tip of the weapon, and it's kind of off-putting in that respect. Ultimately, I think if they kind of reverted back to the way it was before but kept everything the same way it is now, it might be better. It's hard to say unless you actually do it, but the way I think they achieved it beforehand was pretty damn good compared to how it is now, because point shooting wasn't really effective when you were walking around at insane ranges. You still wanted to use your weapon sights, but anywhere between 25 meters and closer was ideal for point shooting, and that's exactly how it's used in real life. Skilled shooters in point shooting can hit targets up to 30 meters with no problem, and very skilled shooters can hit targets up to 50 meters point shooting. That's like, I'm talking insane skill, like these guys are just reflexive, this is all they do. The average soldier engages targets at roughly 10 to 25 meters when you're point shooting. That's kind of the ideal range, 30 meters tops. Anything beyond that, you're typically going to use your sights, or you're going to bring the weapon a little bit closer to you and aim kind of just more above the weapon, so you're kind of aiming down the barrel, which is pretty much what you do when you're point shooting anyway, but you're using more of the weapon sights when you're doing so. Typically, it depends on the type of magnification of the weapon sight you're using. That's another factor. If you have a canted iron sight, obviously you can just use that in close quarters. If not, you just tilt the weapon and you kind of just shoot over the barrel. There's different techniques for point shooting, but ultimately the reality is point shooting is a very effective and useful tool, and I don't want to see them go the route of making it randomized and chaotic, kind of like Call of Duty titles or any other title where basically you shoot from the shoulder or the hip and your spray pattern is random and ridiculous, because it's not how it is in the real world. As I've always said, Arma 3 is a fantastic example of this, even though there is a crosshair in that game to help you kind of like point and shoot better. The reality is, that game does it right, because where your weapon's pointing is where the bullets fly. Simple as that. It doesn't deviate off course, it goes to where your weapon is pointed, and Interstellar Marines does that right now, but they're kind of making it so that the weapon actually moves and jerks the screen around in tandem more violently now than it did in the past, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and kind of throws off the whole idea of being able to actually control your muzzle when you're firing. So that's just my other gripe, but other than that, the game does feel a hell of a lot better than it ever has before. It feels slower, it feels more tactical, and it's exactly what this game needed, as I've said multiple times. So that pretty much wraps up the stamina system, and everything else is subjective. There's some minor fixes. You can think of Neurogen Incident is now in version 3. They've addressed some issues in there, and I've experienced pretty much none. Performance increases across the board, which is really, really nice. And the fact that the actual bots, the mercenary bots that carry weapons, now are on the opposite team of the melee bots, so they're like killing each other when they encounter each other, and it's crazy, it's like chaotic. And if you haven't played it, you have all week to do so, because it's a hell of a lot better now, especially how it's going to be free the entire duration of this week. Free to play for a whole week. I mean, that's pretty awesome, I gotta say. And the fact that it's going to be at 66% off throughout that week, which you can buy it for, I think it's going to be roughly around $5, if I recall. I don't know, I'll check. And it's solid, guys. The game is coming along nicely, I gotta say. And the fact that they actually have some pretty big, ambitious ideas that are going to be occurring within the next 3 months, up until E3. They plan on having this new type of game mode that fits into the training environment called Hell Week, inspired by Navy SEALs Hell Week. And it's kind of a combination of what DayZ and Hunger Games would be like if they had a baby, but within the actual underground facilities that Interstellar Marines has in Nevada in their lore, which in and of itself sounds extremely compelling and interesting. And it sounds, I mean, initially when I heard about it, I was kind of just like, what are you doing? This isn't really like what's happening. Like, because it didn't seem natural, it didn't fit with the idea that there's going to be a campaign or anything. But the idea behind this is to give us a cool training environment and game type to play that's not going to completely erase or overwrite what they want to achieve from the get-go. Like, they want to achieve a trilogy and they want to achieve an entire campaign. This isn't going to overwrite that. This is just an addition to the training environment, so to give us something else to do. In addition to that, it's going to give them a bunch of tools to progress forward when making new additions to the game, which is going to be important, because that's what Neurogen Incident did when it was first released. It gave them a lot of tools to work with to give us updates quicker and more efficiently and more bug-free, basically. And with this update of Hell Week, it's going to be developed over the next 3 months, which they're going to be slaving over. It's going to do the exact same thing, except potentially even more so. So there's a lot to look forward to in Interstellar Marines as it moves forward in development, and I can't wait to see how this game comes into fruition by the time it's actually released. And again, I'll be covering this game every single update along the way, and we'll see how things progress. My name's PepperBelly. Thank you guys for joining me today, and I'll see you guys on the next one.